How's it going? Nate Mumford, Director of Sales Engineering, broadcast live as always here in quarantine in Danbury, Connecticut. Today I'm joined by Jeff Ziegler, our Senior Sales Engineer. How's it going, Jeff?
It's going great, Nate, and everybody else.
I can close this broadcasting live shortly because we are in fact broadcasting live and I'm recording. Everything is good. Good morning, Di. Thank you, or V. Thank you for checking in. So our feed is live and good to go as always. We are here every Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time, showcasing all of our RCS products and talking about all these cool tips and tricks and getting you in the know for a lot of upcoming RCS goodies as well. So, for example, like you can be a beta user. We're looking for beta users right now for G Selector 490 or Zetta 5.20.1. Some really, really cool features coming down the pipeline in both those versions. If you're working from home, we want to know. Send us your photos. You can email us live at rcsworks.com. You can direct message us as well, or you can post here. It's up to your choosing. But we'll send you a goodie bag. So send us photos of you working from home, working remotely, and we'll send you some RCS goodies as well. And more good stuff on the way. In regards to RCS Lives, we'll be teasing Zetta 5.20.1 and G Selector 490 and all of that good stuff. Right, Jeff?
That's right.
That's my housekeeping spiel. Today we are going to talk about Zetta's background recorder, otherwise known as, in short-term cool speak, the Zetta BGR. So if you hear us saying that a couple times, BGR just means background recorder, right? Makes sense? And so, so we're going to talk about everything in regards to the Zetta's background recorder. And the really cool thing is that, we were just talking offline about the fact that the background recorder can do so much. When you first see it, you think of it as kind of like a way to record, certain elements, both audio and trigger non-audio elements. But the cool thing is that it really kind of acts like a station. It acts kind of like an extra limb of Zetta that can do a lot of really cool things, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. BGR, the recording part is in the name, but it really does do an awful lot. And just like, you can play songs, with a Zetta sequencer, you can record with BGR, but it does so much more. Just like a standard Zetta sequencer, you can do so much more than just play a song or something.
Yeah. So I thought we would dive right in. We'll talk about the setup, configuration, talk a little bit about clocks versus logs, and then give some examples how users interpret the BGR. So first things first, we want to configure our record devices, right? So that's be under configuration and computers. Mm-hmm. This is where you can define what Zetta sees, right? Remember, we have the play devices here. We're going to have the record inputs next to that. And of course, I have my virtual drivers here. I clicked on play devices. That's going to bring up all of my play devices. So give me a couple of seconds here with Zoom. Also, it takes a lot of my resources here. But the record inputs, play devices are what's playing, obviously. So that's going to be kind of, your audio over IP or analog. The record inputs is going to be everything that's recording, right? That's going to be essentially what can record. You're going to see the microphone source. You're going to see a couple options here too. And yes, I'm aware here. I'm letting this just load up. I have, I think it's like 16 channels that is currently being utilized by both Zoom and my OBS software. So it's just kind of second to look and see. You can see these are all my play devices. That's why it takes so long. And if I go to my record
currently
inputs,
in use.
yes, thanks, Jeff. And if you look at the record devices, this is essentially what we're talking about. So you can see I have my USB Focusrite. I got some built-in microphones here as well. These are just recording devices that, Zetta can see. So first things first, for the background recorder, we have to define what's recording and what's going on here. So that's where we first define the record inputs. After that, we can then talk about essentially its own task, right? What it can do. And that's we go to configuration and background recorders. And Jeff, feel free to chime in here if you want.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to if we can, because realize that you could have multiple record inputs because you could be recording multiple things at the same moment in time with BGR. So you could define 2, 3, however many simultaneous you might need on a given machine. These days, it seems with integrated time shifting with satellite receivers, the demand isn't quite as heavy for simultaneous recording as it used to be, but it's still available, and you certainly may have application for it depending upon your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So over under configuration and background recorders, this is where we can start defining those tasks. So as Jeff was saying, you can have multiple recorders. You can also have one recorder that does multiple things. right? So you can have a whole list over here, and you'll notice this window looks very, very similar to that of the config and stations. And that's because it kind of does act like its own individual station. There's a lot of functions here, especially if you look at the recorder clocks and the recorder logs. So know that you have some flexibility in regards to playback, ETM and fill, some options here. But the biggest thing is going to be the audio routing. And that's going to be not necessarily the biggest thing, but one of the things that's most utilized is the audio routing. And that's essentially going to be, if you have, let's say, the XDS1 versus the XDS2, and you're switching between the two audio sources, you can define that from here under the available routes and so on and so forth. Anything you want to mention about this, Jeff?
Yeah, just, it certainly could be satellites, different satellite receivers, but it also could be other sources, Comrex bricks, whatever that you may want to record in the background. Let's say somebody's going to drop off a weather feed at 5 minutes at the top of the hour. You could schedule an automated recording of that if you needed to live, or take a feed off of something else that's happening live. What happens at 55. You can just schedule a timed recording from that. But the routes allow you to drive what external source you want to connect to a given input. So as Nate described, you could have XDS receivers, bricks, or whatever, and all feed one input, or you could have different routes for multiple inputs too.
Yeah. By the way, we do have comments open, so if you have any questions for Jeff or myself, or if you want to mention anything, or just checking in, like Lone checked in, thank you for watching. Josh was just mentioning that he RCS Australia just introduced him to the background recorder, and he loves it. So these some cool things, Josh. Hopefully, we can give you some ideas how to take with it and run with it. So again, we configured it, recording inputs. We defined the actual tasks over here, and that leads us to the next point, which is the configuration. And that's going to be the recorder logs versus the recorder clocks, right? So recorder clocks, recorder logs. That's different, of course, from the modules here, the logs and clocks. We're talking about the recorder clocks and logs. And I'll open these both up, and I'll put them side by side because they're treated very similar here. And if you remember, we're kind of getting to the programming side of things. You have clocks, which are your generic templates, and then you have the days, the physical days of the week. So you can think of it as essentially, and you can see there from the drop down, I'm picking which Zetta task. That was my actual recorder, right? So that's what I'm picking over here. So I have these two side by side. I'm going to go and just, you know what, Jeff? I'm going to put this in manual mode and stop that sequencer so it's not going to be distracting for us. So what we have here essentially is the clocks and the logs, right? So think of the clocks as the days of the week, right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Whereas think of the actual recorder log as Thursday, October 8th. And the difference, of course, is, well, if I want to have, let's say, a generic background recorder functionality, I would do that in the clock. So it's repetitive, it's repeating. Whereas, let's say we're doing a sporting event and something changes, like the event got canceled or whatever, I can essentially get rid of it from here on the actual October 8th log itself. And so from here, now we're just kind of really opening up programming, right? We're talking about just clock structures. You can see here that I have a couple standard clocks. I also have I am a special BGR clock. And that's for essentially, if you go to this icon here, the manage clock hours. The way this works is essentially I have all these clocks. It's my Sunday through Saturday, and I can choose which, clock is going to be there. So you cannot delete the days of the week. Those are in there, obviously for purposes, because we need to have some default functionality. So you can see here that if I want my Sunday clock to be more of I am a special BGR clock, that's how you would change it here. You would first create the clock itself using the little plus, and then after that, you would go and manage the clock hours and go from there. Don't get in the habit of, okay, well, I have a special clock. Going back to that sporting event example, if I know that on Thursday, October 8th, I don't have a game, don't build a clock to get rid of the game. Use the logs to get rid of the game on that day. Maintain the actual clock structure. You don't want to get in one of those, I keep calling them gotcha moments, where essentially you make a quick little small change and you forget that, in that Sunday clock, there might be something special during the overnight that you didn't realize was there. By the way, as I said, comments are open here. I'm just going to check here. Jeff, Kai, thanks for checking in. Josh as well. So Josh was saying it would be awesome if we can use Zetta to go voice track into the background recorder log so you can the main voice tracker. There's some functionality there, Josh, in regards to you can assign hotkeys, and those hotkeys are reflected over in Zetta to go. And if you create those macros, you could, in theory, start combining some elements here. And then Kai was saying, um, if Kai was saying if she can hide a category in G Selector and have it not show up in Zetta, they're 100% integrated. So whatever you see in G Selector is going to see there in Zetta as well. So I don't believe you can hide a category from both. You can definitely have a category in G Selector, have it on that asset, or just have it kind of in the background rather. And then that won't appear in Zetta because it's not really a choice yet. It's a choice, but there's nothing highlighted in that category. I can poke you if you want and talk a little more about that offline over here too, just so you know. So yeah. And by the way, Jeff, our boss is also watching as well. So hi, Daniel. So let's talk about adding elements. I have a couple other videos talking about this, but if you recall, it's very simple. Just right click, insert. Now, because we're talking about the background recorder, we're going to really kind of talk about these control events because these are kind of the non-audio elements that you're looking to add, right? And remember, this is a clock that's going to be scheduled as part of recorder log. So this is where we're starting to talk about how treat this as kind of a station. Treat this as like you can essentially put, non-audio elements in the background to run at whatever time you want. So you can put in some like take a backup at a certain time or do a certain function. Jeff and I were joking if you want to use the morning show example, Jeff, with the keys.
Yeah, yeah. We actually had a morning show guy that they had a secured building, and they actually scheduled a GPO into the BGR clock at I think maybe 5:45 or something. Whenever the guy would stroll in, and it would disarm the door for 15 minutes so he could come in and then relock it thereafter. At 6 o'clock, I think is what it was. Rearm it. That would just make him easy, so his hands were full and stuff. He didn't have to dig his badge out. But that's just what you could do. Tower lights. You could do a coffee pot, I guess. Whatever. I mean, really, whatever you can do with a GPO. But this is really where I think the BGR name becomes a tad bit of a misnomer because it only mentions the record part. But if you look through the execute command list, it's monstrous. If I wanted to, let's pretend I wanted to just have a safety valve and say, you know what, I want to make sure at the turn of the day, I know I should be fully automated programming. I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I drive an auto mode only to make sure that this station is in auto mode. I can drive the modes of another station from BGR and have it in the background. So it doesn't even have to be on the clock. Jocks don't even have to know it's there. Nobody can delete it because they wouldn't know to look on the BGR log. They would be looking on their program log for the station. But you can have safety valves like that to be able to make sure things are in the proper modes. Audio routing is where it needs to be at a certain time of day. Lots of functions well beyond recording.
Yeah, and as you can see here, I always like to show this execute command window because these are all just some of the things that you can create and do in Zetta. But I can also search and do background. And you can see that these are all the background recorder things you can do. On demand, start, stop, record, pause, play, sync. All of that good stuff is here. And of course, when you have these execute commands, you can also build them into macros. So one macro can do a whole bunch of things, right? You could always compound them and make them bigger. So you could essentially do one single execute command of a background recorder, or you can do a whole bunch more with an execute command plus some other functionality. And then in addition to, we use that macro to then do stuff. And this is what I'm talking about, Josh, when you're talking about the macros and the hotkeys. What you can do is you define them in your Zetta. You essentially create the execute commands, combine them into a macro, take that macro, drag and drop it into a hotkey. Once it's in a hotkey, it's available in Zetta to go. And then when you're in Zetta to go, you can control that and manipulate it from remotely, from your home, wherever it may be. So that's how you can start building these things to a bigger, really cool outcome. And by the way, Kai, I did see your comment. I will poke you after this is over. We'll have a conversation and direct message and talk about some of those G Selector things for you and your music directors too. But I want to make sure I saw your comment there. Also, shout out to Brian Willard, who's head of our field technician services. He's on the road right now. Otherwise, he would be with us. I offered the invitation, but sadly he can't be here. But he gave his notes and just fun little, his little notes, which are always great because they're user experiences. So he wanted to mention too, He has a lot of customers who use it to fire hard time events for source routing, hot spare changes, spot blocks, whole variety of other things. It's a good tool for engineering to perform background functions in addition to recordings. And then from there, he also mentioned that Zetta has the ability to send and receive GPIOs, TCP, UDP internally between machines. So, for example, if you wanted to record segments of the morning show using the BGR, we don't have to wire it up or configure an external GPIO device. We could simply send a TCP command from the Zetta sequencer machine to the BGR to stop and start recording. We do this a lot with, we tie it to a GPO at the start of the spot block, and then have at the very end of the spot block, we essentially start the recording. So just to review that, in here in the clock structure itself, we would have some type of, during a spot block, we would start, or sorry, during the first spot block, we would stop the recording, right? Because in theory, the top of the hour, using the morning show example, at 6 a.m., we start the recording. At the first spot block, we stop the recording, we save that asset, and then at the end of the spot block, we start the recording again. And again, with the TCP, internal machines, you don't have to wire this up. You can just use TCP commands on there too.
That really is a real popular use of BGR, is to segment up a morning show or a live talk show that you want to create best ofs, because you're basically are stopping from spot block to spot block, if you will. I'm recording between spot blocks is the way it works, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then all those elements that I recorded are already in the system library for either direct subsequent rescheduling. So if, let's say, I wanted to re-air the morning show at 2 a.m. or something, I wouldn't do that at that time, but whenever, or maybe over the weekend, or, I have all those elements already in the database, just ready to drag over or build into clocks for automated stuff. Or if I want to build promos, the BGR is always rolling tape for me during these live segments, so that I can slice and dice later and create nice promos from, hey, if you didn't catch the morning show this morning, here's what you missed.
Yeah. And that's a great transition to, let's talk about some workflows, how to design those workflows. Loving the comments here. So Josh, my question for you would be is, why would you want to voice track into a BGR log? Because essentially, when you do a voice track, we're talking about playing something, right? So if we want to record something for playback, that would be played out of the station. So I'll poke you offline. We'll have a conversation about what you're trying to achieve there. But I will counter by saying that, you wouldn't necessarily want to voice track into a BGR log, because it's not going to play out, so to speak. It's for, running in tandem for behind the scenes, right? If it's behind the scenes and you have a voice track, you're not going to get that source that you want. So
now,
let's talk about
that.
Go ahead,
being
Jeff.
said, there is some application for play out from BGR. One example is, I know that there are some talk formats that want to chime at the top of the hour, in the good old days, if you will. And you could schedule that for the BGR to play it out an audio device to mix into your air chain. So at the top of every hour you get the bong, and everybody can know exactly where the top of the hour is if you're not taking network news or whatever.
Absolutely. And Josh also put up a great point too. The publish feature, that's a great way to utilize the background recorder. So if you want to do those publishes, again, you can, don't forget, I had this feature on one of my past videos, but when you can publish, you can actually publish the log from its start and end time and date. You can export an asset or a mini log or a show or a couple other functions as well. So there's a lot of functionality in regards to the publish feature, and you can definitely use the BGR log or the clock rather, to schedule those publish features. So every Friday, you can essentially put the publish feature at Friday at 3 p.m. and it can export all of your best of morning shows. And then you can send that to wherever you want based on, the published location. And you can have an automated process of taking, let's say you have 5 stations, you have 5 morning shows, we have a BGR that goes and takes everything, records it into assets. You can put that asset in a custom asset type. So you can have morning show imaging. You can see here something like hour 1, segment 1. Once they're all created, then you can then do the publish feature using the BGR clocks. You can export that log as well. So yeah, there's absolutely, you can do a lot of really cool functionality there. So when we talk about, let's say talk about adding the asset, right? One of the differences, I'll actually have Jeff, you want to talk about that regarding the difference between next gen and Zetta.
Yeah, I mean, our legacy users on the next gen platform will recognize that a lot of the application here, because in the day it was called DRR and next gen, which stood for digital reel to really data concept. And um, the one of the differences between Zetta and next gen was that the the DRR, you could schedule it to create a new asset, which is kind of an odd application, especially these days where um, time shifting and stuff is quite often done in satellite receivers. You're more often recycling assets than creating new. So one of the differences to be able to give you a little more power control of how this thing gets assigned is um, DRR could create an asset in and of itself that didn't exist in the database. The BGR basically reuses assets in the database. So even if it's something that's never been recorded before, you can put a slug in the database for it to use to record the first one, and then it will reuse that every other time. But that way, you can predefine all kinds of parameters well beyond some of the limited stuff that you could do at the DRR level with regards to asset metadata and stuff. You can pre-build all that stuff in there so that when the recording's ready, all that metadata is with it too for the way you need it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the differences between DRR and BGR that I want to point out is we don't create new assets. We predefine the assets in Zetta so that all the metadata can be ready to rock and roll, very enhanced metadata once the recording happens.
And the reason for that too is because there's a lot more control. There's a lot more of the idea of that, hey, I am defining this is what the workflow is. This is what I'm doing. And it also saves you too that it's working correctly after it's there because, you have the asset saved and all that good stuff. So between the troubleshooting and the control, it's a way better way to define, how you're recording. So I'm just going to configuration and system. I'm going to the on-demand recordings. Again, we're doing here is essentially defining when we have that morning show, I'm recording to an asset. That's what I'm talking about here. So I just have, the name. I have, of course, the recording input, which device it is. I have, or if I want to route, that's in here. What happens if the recording stops, the record length, the format of the recording itself. Where am I recording to? So am I a file? That's going to be essentially outside of Zetta, right? That's in the Windows aspect. So there's file is outside. We also have FTP. Host name, username, password. This is where I'm talking about if you want to do some best of morning shows, but also kind of that first segment, right? So the publish would give you kind of more of a, collect everything and then send it out. This would be for the initial recording, take it, send it somewhere, boom. By the way, I love the fact, Jeff, that we, Henrik and Josh have a side conversation that's going on about BGRs on the Facebook Live. I just want to point that out. I love it. And yeah, Henrik was talking about how he uses it to record the news on one station and replay it on the other. And so BGR started with a cue point on the news jingle. So that's a great point, Henrik. I just want to kind of point that out here. I'm going to open up my BGR record asset, and I'm just going to move this. I'll put this down here for right now. So what you have here after the FTP, you also have the asset. So again, file is outside, asset is inside. You can see here, drop the asset to assign. Just so you know, it's right there. See my cursor? So it truly is. Drop it right over where it says there. You can see BGR record asset right then and there. Now we're talking about, Henrik brought up a great point about cue points. And also I want to talk about the playback method. Remember the playback method, play file is just as it is. I'm just going to play the file that's there. Play external is going to be, I'm going to play an asset that is outside of Zetta. We have live event. That's going to be treated essentially with those voice track settings I talked about earlier, where if you have G selector integrated, you create a live event so that it's treated as a link in G selector, but you can voice track it over in Zetta. Very, very powerful tool. I highly encourage you to make all of your voice tracks live events because it gives you a lot more power in regards to the scheduling process under G selector. And then, of course, we have our friends. I'll first say there's the stream URL. That's for our conference app with Revma, right? If you're remote workflows, remember those videos we've done. If you're broadcasting live remotely, we can essentially use Revma's conference app. We can use that also with Zetta Cloud as well. And we can, of course, use that stream to broadcast live. That's where the stream URL is. That's brand new. And then finally, we have our good friend Play Incoming File, which I'm sure you're looking at this going, yeah, I never used that. What is the Play Incoming File? And that is a way for essentially this asset to where when I'm recording the BGR, right? So I have it in the clocks or the log. I'm recording this asset onto BGR record asset. I can actually play this file while recording it, almost like a DVR, playing it back like, 10 minutes after it started. It's a really cool and powerful feature. So that's what the
Time
playing
shifting.
file is. Go ahead, Jeff.
Time shifting is what a lot of people refer to that as. If my news came in at the top of the hour, but my song wasn't done, but I want to take the news, I can use that to make the worlds match up and just time shift that to being start playing back, even if it's still recording after the song ends.
Yeah. So you can see you can have a background recorder. You can have multiple background recorders. You can have multiple tasks for that one recorder. You can, of course, change audio routing or you can record an asset. And of course, when you can see here, you can have multiple recordings and multiple assets. That's where defined here. So you can see like this could be, again, instead of BGR record asset, this could be morning show, hour one, segment one, morning show, hour one, segment two, segment three, segment four, so on and so forth. You can have all of your morning show segments here is part of that list, right? And so there's the play incoming file, and the cue points, by the way, that Henrik was talking about is down here. You can click somewhere and define a cue point for the BGR to do a certain functionality. So you can see here, there's some custom aspects as well, and that's what Henrik is using to essentially start his background recorder, so on and so forth. Let's see, I'm going through my comments here. Cool, great. I think we can answer all those questions. So at that point in time, so now we have the assets created, we have the publish feature. These are some really cool ways that you can essentially interpret and utilize BGR instead of background recorder. So, Jeff, I think we should wrap it up with, if you have any of the comments or questions, feel free to do so now. I'll give you kind of like a 2-minute warning before we sign off. So if you have any other questions, let us know. Josh, Henrik, I love it. It's great. I will answer some more of these questions for you. And let's talk about some examples, Jeff, how users interpret it. We were talking about the BGR, and sometimes, we talk about a lot of users and how they interpret Zetta. This is a very, it can be a simple or complex piece of software based on how you interpret it. If you don't want to have all the modules open, you don't have to. You keep it simple. If you want it more complex, you can totally put all the modules open and have the screen as complex as you want it to be. It's all about you as a user. And so, for example, if you have, let's say, those, public access shows that come in that you might have to record for a half hour or something like that, and they might not be too tech savvy because it is a public affairs show, right? So maybe what you can do is you can define a certain function inside of Zetta and Zetta's background clocks where every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, that your, public access show is going to record their show. You can tell it at 11 a.m. to boom, start the recording, at 11:30, stop the recording. And that way the jocks who are there, who maybe are not tech savvy, don't have to worry about, turning on the mics and all that good stuff.
Right. In fact, yeah, I've seen sites do this for public affairs where they'll take, they have a studio that's kind of designed for type of stuff. Could be a conference room, could be whatever. But you basically just have one of, an automated mixer that, when mics are, whoever's talking right now, that's the mic, it's open and it follows whoever talks. But it basically automatically mixes the show for you. And then they simply schedule, they say, okay, guys, make sure you're in the studio by, 3 o'clock. We'll start rolling tape or file, however you want to think of it, at 3:15, and it's going to go for until 3:45. And they didn't do this, but they lived by the station clock, so the people would come in at 3 o'clock and they'd get on their places, get their coffee, and they'd watch. And boy, when that clock hit 3:15, hey, welcome to the to whatever the show title was,
Yeah.
and they would talk for a half hour, and it would automatically be going to file or tape, and no engineer was needed. And now they were working ahead so that if there was a problem, they could certainly reschedule things. And somebody, can check and peek in on them, but nobody had to in order to get things started.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you could even, with the ability to playback, you could even have given them a countdown. Now, the site that I saw wasn't giving a countdown, but with BGR, you could absolutely roll a show recording in 3, 2, 1, and play that back through a local speaker there if you really wanted to, if you didn't want to just live off the clock.
Absolutely. And then
all kinds of possibilities for being able to do to really help streamline the workflow at the station and not have to have a dedicated computer to do that. This thing just does it in the background on another machine,
Yeah,
and you just have to route the audio gets routed to it based on time of day.
absolutely. And Josh, this is those we talk about those complex commands with macros or a compound, I should say. You can do all of that, put it in a macro, put it in a hotkey, and then once it's in a hotkey, then you of course go to Zetta to go, and you can fire it from Zetta to go. So if you wanted that control and you couldn't be there for whatever reason, if let's say you're a producer of that public affairs show and you couldn't be in the studio, you can fire that from a hotkey remotely.
Sure.
That's also a possibility too. So
Yep.
last call for questions. I'm going to cycle through here. Again, just to review, we're talking about Zetta's background recorder or BGR. Treat this as like a station. Treat it as you have the recorder logs and clocks. You can do a lot of stuff, a lot of functionality behind the scenes. Another example too, we were talking about, I was going to say, I'm trying to look at my notes here. Don't forget, you can always go and see what also played. So if I do go to the tools and the recorder logs, I can see in the past what actually played. So if you're worried about, if you're troubleshooting or whatever reason you wanted to see what happened, you can see that things actually played as well. So again, treat this as a live log.
Yeah, I mean, even recordings get a check mark when they complete.
Yeah.
So whatever it is.
I thought there was one great point that I was missing here, Jeff, and I can't seem to find in my notes, of course.
Well, one
Go
of the
ahead.
things, again, to just play a bit off of what one of the viewers had mentioned, is the fact that the BGR isn't station specific. It's for the entire system. So your BGR could be recording stuff for your talk AM as well as something for your FM. And it basically is just a team member for you. You don't have to dedicate this input is always for this, that input's always for that. Once the assets get into the system, they can be assigned to be used by whatever stations they need.
And the point I was making that I found here was don't forget you can add multiple BGRs for an overlap if
Oh,
you're looking for redundancy or you want to save machine resources. That's the key I was trying to make. If you're trying to save machine resources, instead of having your file server do all of those non-audio functions, you can alleviate some of that with the background recorder. So you can essentially have a file server and let's say an audio server or a secondary server or just a production machine or whatever it is, wherever that background recorder is defined, you could essentially alleviate some of those resources from your file server utilizing the background recorder on one of your other machines within the Zetta network.
And let's mention one thing because I don't know that we mentioned it before, but BGR is an option. It is not just rolled in. It's in the code, but it's a licensed option.
Yes.
So that is a paid module that you purchase to be able to turn on with your Zetta license,
Yes.
and basically realize also that it's per machine. So while I can have multiple inputs per machine, I may not want to necessarily put all my eggs in one basket. And if I'm a real BGR intensive site, I may have a couple of BGR machines.
Great point.
And so you'd have a couple of modules then that you would license and activate.
Yeah. And of course, if you ever, let's say, you inherit a news talk station or whatever it is, and you need a second background recorder, we could always add a license afterwards too. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's just a relicense and then it will be added to your account. So it's very, very easy stuff there too. Super last call for questions. Thank you everybody for checking in. I really appreciate it. I'm going to answer some of your questions offline as well. So Kyle will be talking to you. And thank you so much for checking us out. Of course, as always, don't forget to wear your mask, be safe. Thank you to all our essential workers. And I'll see you next Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time for some more goodies as part of our RCS Live. So, Jeff, thank you so much. Thank you, V, as well. And as I said, we'll see you next Thursday. Have a great one.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
It's been fun.